Welcome to the launch of the African Space Leadership Institute. Thank you all for joining us today, October 4th, 2022, which happens to be the 65th anniversary of the dawn of the space age. Many thanks to all our keynote speakers who are present here with us from the African Union Commission, from the African Development Bank, from the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you also for all our panelists, our esteemed panelists, which I shall introduce shortly. To start off the program, I'm going to give us a brief background about the African Space Leadership Institute. Thank you. In talking about the African Space Leadership Institute, I would like to trace a bit of the history to about 2012, when the African Union Space Working Group was established by the African Union Commission. The Space Working Group had some mandate or terms of reference, which I'll mention very shortly. But it included the development of a suite of a set of instruments which were supposed to lead to the formalization of the African Space Program. And so the Space Working Group met for about 9 or 10 sessions between 2012 and 2016 in different parts of the continent, meeting with people, engaging with different stakeholders, academia, professionals, government functionaries, industry, students, and different groups of people. The pictures you see here are different sessions, just a few of the sessions of the meetings of the Space Working Group. The terms of reference of the Space Working Group included to articulate a shared space vision for Africa, to determine future global trends and niche areas that Africa could focus on, since definitely we can't just engage in every aspect of space exploration, to articulate an African space policy and strategy, to identify existing space-related infrastructure and institutions. And one of the reasons for that was because we really want to replicate institutions or infrastructure that are already existing. So it was good to identify who has what and what is the current status of those infrastructure and institutions. And of course, identify human resource needs. Between 2012 and 2016, the Space Working Group came up with 2 key documents, the African Space Policy and the African Space Strategy, and these documents are online. They are downloadable for us to go through them. The documents have 2 main goals. One, to create a well-coordinated and integrated African space program that is responsive to the social, economic, political, and environmental needs of the continent, as well as being globally competitive, to develop a regulatory framework that supports an African space program and that ensures that Africa is a responsible and peaceful user of outer space. In the process of the work of the Space Working Group, we identified several gaps within the continent, and we could sum this up into 3 major areas. One is a poor decision-making process, not just at organizational level, but even at the national level across the continent. Secondly, there's a weakened strategic positioning and implementation of space programs in Africa, which could be connected to the issue of poor decision-making process, poor policy-making process in the continent. Also, Africa participates poorly or contributes poorly to international forums. Our contributions are poor, our participation is ineffective. Now, if this looking down, or if you trace down these gaps, we saw that it could be kind of narrowed down or traced down to the limited capacity in space policy, strategy, and law in Africa. And so from 2016, we started toiling with the idea of setting up a think tank or an institute that will try and fill up the different gaps that had been identified in the continent. And we decided to also put the ideas down on paper by writing a paper which was published in the Space Policy Journal in 2018. But we didn't take much action on that. And then COVID came 2020. But towards the end of 2021, at about actually November, towards the end of November 2021, we started meeting together. I'll share who are the we very soon, meeting together virtually every Saturday from November 2021 up till now, maybe except for a few Saturdays, maybe due to holidays or some other exigencies that we could not meet. Trying to fashion out and trying to flesh out the idea and trying to develop an organization that could implement the idea that we're thinking of. Eventually, we came up with the African Space Leadership Institute. It was registered in South Africa in July this year. And today, what we have is a launch or a public presentation of the Institute. These are the 4 people that have been working together, trying to, I work together in bringing this institute to life. Dr. Adigun Adeabiodun, he was a former UN expert on space applications. He also served as the senior special advisor to President Olusegun Obasanjo on space science and technology. He also served at the time as the chairman of UN COPUS. Barrister Lulu Makapela, a space law expert from South Africa, my humble self, and Dr. Valanathan Munsame, who was the former CEO of the South African National Space Agency, and also chaired the space working group that developed the African space policy and strategy. So 4 of us were really the engineers or the kind of the brain, or behind the ASLI, the African Space Leadership Institute. The vision for ASLI it kind of relates to the goals of the African Space Program, because our interest is Africa. We cannot disconnect ASLI from what's going on in Africa, both at the national level and at the continental level. So our vision can be drawn from the goals of the African space policy and strategy, and also is connected to the gaps which we also saw in the course of the work of the Space Working Group. So our vision is to see African space activities that meet the developmental needs and aspiration of its people and that are globally responsible and relevant. Our mission is to build capabilities and capacity and transform our knowledge about issues relating to space policy, strategy, law, governance, and leadership. The objectives, 1, to build capacity in space policy, strategy, law, governance, and leadership in Africa, to strengthen Africa's participation in international forums, and to support strong strategic positioning of Africa, of space programs in Africa. In terms of service offerings, we have a couple of things we have in mind which we intend to do, including organizing webinars, seminars, conferences, organizing training courses. We've already done some pilot classes in the past 2 years, but we've restructured the curriculum, we've reorganized the entire program, and we are looking up to people coming to learn, and of course for us to also share knowledge. We're also looking at offering advisory opinions to organizations, to companies, to different research groups, and also to do advocacy work. Other things that we plan to do include organizing dialogues, symposia, panel discussions. We also want to do research, and the outcome of our research, we want to make it public, maybe through policy briefs, through journal articles, through books, through position papers. We also plan to have resource libraries, both online and physical libraries. Of course, the Institute has to be sustainable, and so we use the business model canvas, which I believe many of us here are conversant with, to develop a business plan for the Institute. And here, we just highlighted some of the content of the business plan. In terms of customer segments, we are looking at different strata of individuals and organizations. So looking at space agencies, space professionals, students in higher institutions, but also in lower levels like secondary and primary schools. We also look at reaching out to research and academic institutions, then the industry, companies, aspiring, emerging, and established entrepreneurs, and of course, national governments. I've already mentioned some of the activities we plan to organize, but just also include that we want to develop and deliver content. And of course, we're going to also use different social media to deliver content. We also plan to develop toolboxes which could be useful both at the national level and organizational level for policy development, for law, and for strategy development. We plan to develop research and publication on key topics, develop training materials, offer advisory opinions, organize events, both online and physical, and of course, engage in advocacy activities. For us, who are already involved in the activities of the ASLI, we come with wide knowledge and experience within this field. And we also have networks, large networks, both as individuals and as a group, with people both within Africa and outside Africa. We've published in books, in journals, and also even in traditional media. We've also published in such activities, in such platforms, I mean to say. And then we've been engaged in several other NGOs, like the International Institute for Space Law, the Space Duration Advisory Council, the International Astronautical Federation, the African Space Leadership Congress, and of course the UN COPUS. We've been involved in space programs in Africa, both within our countries and at the continental level. We've also, indeed, all of us have lectured in higher institutions at one point or the other. So we bring this knowledge and experience into the Institute, and with other people who have shown interest, and many of us here who will be interested in working alongside the Institute, we are really looking forward to a wide pool from which people can draw from. Key partners include the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, the UNECA, national space agencies, national governments, regional economic communities, space-related institutions, industry forums, development banks, space professionals, students. These are both our clients, but they're also our partners. And we are looking at not only working with partners within Africa, but also outside Africa, including universities, international organizations, professional organizations, and similar think tanks around the world, like the European Space Policy Institute, the US Space Policy Institute, the Secure World Foundation. Thank you. Quickly, I'll just go over to invite our first keynote speaker. And that will be from the African Union Commission. And speaking on behalf of the African Union Commission is Dr. Tidiane Ouattara. I'll just give a brief introduction and then I give him the floor. So Dr. Tidiane Ouattara is currently the space science expert and coordinator for the GMES. GMES actually means Global Monitoring of the Environment and Security. So for the GMES and Africa program, as the space science expert, he leads the development and implementation of the African space policy and strategy, as well as the African Outer Space program. And as the coordinator of the GMS and Africa program, he manages and coordinates the EU-Africa program on Earth observation. So he's kind of wearing two caps at the AUC. Dr. Ouattara received his PhD and a master's degree in remote sensing and geographic information system from Sherbrooke University, Canada. He also holds a master's degree in physical geography from Université de Cocody in Abidjan. He began his career in Canada as a lecturer at Sherbrooke University. He taught not only scientific courses, but also African geopolitics and socio-cultural issues. After a brief stay with the private sector in Montreal, he started working with the federal government of Canada, where he occupied various positions. So since 2016, he has been responsible for the African Outer Space Program at the AUC. Dr. Tidiane, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother Etim. First of all, it is with a real pleasure that I'm representing the African Union Commission. Therefore, on behalf of the Commissioner for Science, Technology, Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, and also on behalf of the Acting Director, Ambani Masheleni, we would like to congratulate first those who have created the African Leadership Institute. This is a key and great achievement. It is coming and strengthening, empowering the African space ecosystem. And ASLI, we've seen I would say, the progress made from a non-formal group to an institute which has its place in the landscape and which will sincerely and efficiently shape the African space, I would say, agenda in Africa. I would like, if you allow me, to take the opportunity to greet Dr. Adigun Ade Abiodun, who is my mentor, who made me, who brought me to Africa from Canada. And today, I would consider ASLI, or ASLI, as Etim said, as one of the legacies of this great man, Dr. Adigun. And for the African Union Commission, he is a leader, the most of the greatest leaders that have served the Commission and the community in Africa on the space matters. We are numerous. We took advantage from him, and I would say there is a time to greet him, and today is one of these times. I'd like to take the opportunity also to thank Dr. Val for all the achievement, all the great work he did for Africa. And again, this is another person, the African Union Commission, would like to recognize the effort and to congratulate today for bringing effort with Dr. Adigun to create the Institute. A team, our young brother, thank you for believing to these mentors, because we are in the same school, learning from them, learning from Adigun. And I think we are on the good track. As the director of ASLI, I think you have the right not to make the mistake, not to make mistake. And we have the right to support you, and our duty will be to be there with you. The African Union Commission consider ASLI as another ally, another key player within the continent that will allow us to push the space agenda far for the benefit of the African citizens. I will have time to talk about several specifics during the panel, but here we would like to say ASLI is coming at the appropriate time, where the African Union Commission, which on behalf of the member states, is developing the governance, finalizing the governance of the continental space, outer space program. But at the same time, we are continuing creating awareness and outreach to allow decision makers to understand the benefit of space for the sustainable development of Africa. It is not a simple and easy action. It is complex. It will require several and multiple actors. ASLI is one of them. The governance, we all know that the African Space Agency will be in Cairo. Just to update, the African Space Agency will be operational soon because the structure and financial implications have been approved by the different organs of the African Union. Therefore, soon, a delegation of the African Union, led by a commission led by Professor Belrossin, who is the Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, will be in Cairo to finalize and start the full and concrete implementation of the establishment and operationalization of the African Space Agency. This is an opportunity to thank ASLI, who has played a great role in engaging, mobilizing, and bringing people together. I saw my young brother, Etim, when he was reading my biography. I need to correct that one because I didn't develop the African space policy. I didn't even lead it. I came where the space policy and strategy were in place. I'm just implementing what has been developed by others as the continuation of the work. It is clear that the African Space Agency has been built also based on the work done by the pioneers. ASLI or ASLI will continue playing a great role, not only at the continental level, but at the country levels. Why? ASLI, for the African Union Commission, will be a pillar to bring all African nations that are big consumers of space products and services, but that do not have space infrastructure. And when I say space infrastructure, I'm not talking about the physical infrastructure. I'm just talking about the governance, the policy, the law, the programs, etc. ASLI will come and contribute a lot. This is what African Union Commission would like to underline today. The African Space Agenda is a huge agenda. We have 55 countries. We have to make sure that every single African country takes advantage of the space products and services. This is not easy, and our expectations vis-a-vis of ASLI is to advise from a neutral position for the interest of the Africans. And we are more than convinced, since the leaders we know that are leading the African Space Leadership Institute have been fighting for Africa for more than 60 years. This is what makes us comfortable. This is what makes us very optimistic, because without any doubt, under their leadership, their advice, their involvement, and their guidance will be more than tremendous and more than critical for the efficient development and implementation of the different programs that will be done by the African Space Agency. As said by Eti, the main role of the African Space Agency is to coordinate the continental programs with the support from the national institutions, be space agencies, be other space institutions. Secondly, we need to create a regulatory framework to allow, for example, people to do space activities with less constraints at the legal or policy level. That is very important and critical, and we all know that space matters can be very difficult at the policy and legal level. At the strategic level, as Etim said, we have to use the space, product and services to support the concrete socio-economic development of Africa. That is important, and this is what GMS in Africa is trying to do with the support with the European Commission, but it is clear that we need to mobilize the internal resources to move forward with the outer space program. That is a necessity for the sustainability of the outer space program, to depend only on African investment, with others coming as support, others coming to conduct together with us the space program. The collaboration with international partners will be important and critical, but that should be built with something Africans themselves should have put in place before. Therefore, ASLI will come with advice on how we build that. The last will be the development of critical mass, the indigenous capacity as stated in the African space policy and strategy. We have to develop the critical mass of space experts in Africa. This is key for all the success of the program. And we are seeing ASLI once again coming on board for advice, strategic advice, policy advice, for the development of that skill set Africa needs. We have a huge opportunity here. 60% of the African young population is young. It is a huge opportunity to train them. I would like to thank you for giving the opportunity to African Union Commission. We, African Union Commission, will be beside ASLI for building a new era for space in Africa, what we call the new El Dorado for space economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ouattara. I noted in your opening remarks your comments about some of the ways that the African Space Leadership Institute could support the activities of the African Union Commission. We've taken note of that, including supporting the governance mechanisms that the AUC is trying to develop. I also noted the point about the African Space Agency, which is we should start operations next year, in 2023. One of the admonitions also is that ASLI must also operate from a neutral position, which is one of the things we want to do as a think tank. And of course, you touched on developing critical mass, especially for the young people, students and young professionals. And ASLI could provide some strategic advice in that. So thank you very much. Your points are well noted. Next, I'm going to call Ms. Doraba, who is going to speak on behalf of the AfDB, the African Development Bank, to give a keynote remark. Ms. Endrina Doraba is the Division Manager for Education, Human Capital and Employment at the African Development Bank Group. She's an educationist, a mathematician, a gender expert, a development practitioner, and of course, a policy advocate. Prior to joining the AfDB, Ms. Doraba was the Executive Director for the Forum for African Women Educationists. While at that forum, she was responsible for the day-to-day management of the organization, specifically ensuring that the forum's regional secretariat, the fiscal operations, the fundraising, the advocacy, human resource, and programmatic strategies were effectively implemented across the network. Thank you, Ms. Doraba, for joining us. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. Maybe just to request that, because I'm having challenges with my network where I am, I'm going to switch off my video as I speak to you. So I hope that is acceptable. Thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to say good day to all of you. I want to start by thanking the organizers for inviting the Africa Development Bank to join this public presentation and the launch of the Africa Space Leadership Institute. Congratulations for this great milestone. We just heard this afternoon that today marks the 65th anniversary of the dawn of the space age. And we believe that the launch of the African Space Leadership today does signify a new vista in Africa's socio-economic development through the utilization of space science, technology, and application. The Africa Development Bank is indeed happy to be part of this and to witness this historical moment. The Africa Development Bank objective really spurs around sustainable economic development of Africa, and it does this through 5 priority areas, which are Feed Africa, Light Up Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. You will agree with me that the space infrastructure capabilities are very important useful tool for serving these priorities. We do know that more than 70% of Africans depend their livelihood on agriculture. Its full potential can be unlocked using space technology, particularly in the area of precision agriculture. Farmers indeed can use the weather information from meteorological satellites to understand the season, the soil conditions, as well as the changing climate patterns. Space is far more important to Africa than it may seem to be at a glance. Strategic and practical use of the space in satellite communication, geographical mapping of our natural resources, urban development, to mention a few, and above all, the right skills mix are critical for the basic survival and prosperity of our continent. Satellite also does provide early warning for certain disaster in the natural and human environment. This then will save a lot of human life and property, and Africa must endeavor to harness the space to reduce our vulnerability, the risk, and losses. Satellite also enable telecommunication access to the internet, as well as information and communication technology. And so it's not just about going to the moon or sending other objects in the space, but indeed the benefits we derive here on Earth are far more than we can imagine. Hence, it's very important for us to be looking at the benefits and the importance of these interactions that we are having in the space, and how that brings about benefits to humankind, such as in terms of medicine, nutrition, and material development. Just bringing you back to the Africa Development Bank, in 2013, the board did approve a 10-year strategy whose overarching objectives were really looking at achieving inclusive growth and transition to green growth through 5 operational priorities, which included infrastructure development, regional economic integration, private sector development, governance, accountability, and skills and technology. The bank has invested heavily in infrastructure across Africa, mostly roads, railway, and airports. While the emphasis has been on infrastructure here on Earth, we need, as a bank, to show interest in the space-based infrastructure, as the services and application from these are used here on Earth. More importantly, transportation, logistics, banking, commerce, to mention a few, are some of the economic activities that rely strongly on the satellite. The bank, as the partner organization of the African Union Commission, is also interested and continues to invest in initiatives that foster regional economic integration. In the international arena, the space is used also to foster cooperation, diplomacy, and peace. In the same manner, Africa needs to leverage on space for its regional integration. We look forward as a bank to see the operationalization of the Africa Space Agency, which was established by African heads of state and governments in 2018. The bank is also interested in private sector development. According to Space in Africa, a media company that focused on space, the value of Africa's space economy in 2021 was about 14.49 billion. This is projected to grow to about 22.46 billion in the next 5 years. Indeed, there are several companies across Africa that operate in the upstream and downstream sectors of the space value chain. The Africa Development Bank is looking forward to exploring these opportunities and support in this emerging new space of industry in Africa. We do recognize that we have a few private sectors that will be speaking today, and we are very excited about that. Because we know that space in Africa, as reported by African Space Economy, has a workforce of over 19,000 in core space activities, and 60% of this workforce is employed by the government. In this dispensation, this is not sustainable. The private sector should, and we encourage them to take leadership in employment, as well as in other space opportunities for, creating jobs and promoting development. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that there's no country on the region that can maximize the gains of space without having a critical knowledge base and skills development or programs for education and training. Taking cognizance of this, the Africa Development Bank will continue to support the effort of the Africa Space Leadership Institute by fulfilling its mission. We do acknowledge that the mission is aligned to the Africa Development Bank Action Plan, which is focused on improving employability and productivity in Africa. At this point, we encourage the students and young people that are participating in this event and Africa to really dare to do more and open up these opportunities and ensure that we are able to fill in the gaps both in knowledge and skills. The development of capacity of human capital is critical and cannot be overemphasized. We do understand that the Africa Space Leadership has developed a series of courses and webinars, and so we encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities in making sure that we get the right skills mix to be able to support the agenda. The bank, like we have said, will continue to work with the African Union and UNESCO in making sure that the dream of the Africa Space Leadership is fulfilled. Finally, let the message about space not just end as today's launch. Our mass media need to continue to press on the case for space. Young people also need to be encouraged to take up the careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as this is the foundation for building Africa's space capabilities. The scientists and practitioners need to demonstrate the practical value of space in our policymakers so that they can understand the importance of investment in space. We also at the bank encourage the organizers to begin in earnest to train African space leaders. You can be assured the cooperation of the Africa Development Bank. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a successful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doraba, for your keynote speech. I noted in your address, you highlighted some of the activities of the African Development Bank, especially the 5 priority areas: Feed Africa, Light Up Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and of course, improve the quality of life for the people of Africa, and how space is very key to the achievement of these key priorities. And that because of that, the African Development Bank will extend its facilities, funding, and other forms of support, not just to develop infrastructure on Earth, but also support the efforts of space companies who want to develop space infrastructure for Africa. Thank you very much, Ma, and also for your, I noted that you're also going to support the efforts of the Institute to develop capacity in different areas of space policy, space law, space strategy, and governance within Africa. So we really appreciate you, and we look forward to a very strong collaboration between the Institute and the AfDB. Next on the lineup of keynote addresses is Dr. Andre Nongema from the UNECA, that's the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Andre Nongema is currently the chief of the Geospatial Information Section at the UN Economic Commission for Africa. He oversees the ECA's work in advancing holistic geospatial information management strategies and governance, and providing assistance to African countries and regional entities in the development and implementation of spatial information infrastructures. Mr. Nongema brings more than 30 years of professional experience in the field of geospatial science and technology. His professional journey is highly focused on leveraging geospatial data, information analytics to support strategic decision-making and evidence-based policy analysis across a range of applications from the public sector to academia and the private sector. Thank you, Mr. Nongema, for coming here before, please.
So let me quickly say some few words after what has been said by my predecessor. They said everything all, but I am very pleased to be here this afternoon for the launch of the Space Leadership Institute. And first of all, I would like to convey to you the warm greeting of the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And space is a key pillar in the programmatic framework of the ECA. I'm also pleased to see so many people coming from various institutions, from the public, to private sector, to academia, and also from various places in Africa and outside the continent, gathering here today to discuss and exchange view on how we can better leverage the potential of space science for sustainable socioeconomic development in Africa. As a personal view, after many years of preaching in the wilderness, if I may say like that, you can measure how much pleased I am today with the launch of this institute. For me, it's a timely opportunity given to all of us to discuss and address the full potential of space in the context of the African development agenda, and has outlined it in the business model of the institute. I believe that we are seeing that the regional space capacity is improving in Africa, with so many countries participating in a variety and notable space technology initiative. And as we stand today, there is no more question that space technology have been and will continue to play a critical role in sustainable development, in innovation and industrial development of our continent. But of course, to fully leverage the potential of space technology, we do need readily available infrastructure, and also the related skilled manpower. As for today, I would like to highlight three main features maybe we should have in mind as we continue to discuss today. My first point is that current, actual, and future development of space science in Africa should not be extraneous driven with a simple transfer of result tools to Africa, but rather should be designed with the constant concern to implement and integrate the technology effectively in homegrown operational program. And I believe that as we are seeing what is happening inside the African Space Leadership Institute, this point is very well taken. The second aspect of it is that effective development of space science and technology may require the establishment or consolidation of institutional and policy frameworks, including laws, regulations, policy that will encourage collaboration, synergy, networking between all stakeholders using space technology. And that will also ensure that we have a collective vision, purpose, and action toward an African lead, an African managed, and an African owned space infrastructure. I believe that having legally binding international treaties, law, regulations, on scale, of course, at national level, are important to ensure responsibility, accountability, and ethical use, and also peaceful use of our common outer space. The United Nations has established what we call the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework. And this framework put in place a robust legal and policy pathway that, on one hand, can help us integrate the space and geospatial policy and legal framework, and in the other hand, can also be essential to institute appropriate national space and geospatial information legislation and policy that will enable the availability, accessibility, exchange, applications, and management of space-related information. So, on a third note, I wish to also underline that space technology are not only about the technology itself, or about the data, or about human capacity. From where I'm sitting, I can see that is also, after all, a matter of lack of appropriate policy and institutional governance in most African countries. So policy development, as we all know, is a highly sensitive issue, and it involves people, hand users, decision makers, policy makers, and sometimes it also involve their influence and their privilege. Therefore, we need to start in the mind of these people, the mind of the most influential one, the policymakers and the decision makers. And for that, I can see that the launch of the African Space Leadership Institute today may be the best way to proceed. And for me, it's a strong signal that the spatial awareness is improving in our continent. So the question now is, how do we continue to arouse the interest of our policymakers in what we are doing and in what we are able to bring to the socio-economic development of the continent? Another aspect, and is the last one, that is important to me, is the development of the infrastructural capacity for space application. of course, a sustainability for the future will go in parallel with building what I must call multi-level infrastructure and network through operational environment, so that we continue to increase the African ownership in all levels of space application development over the continent. And today, the launch of the Institute offers a good opportunity to address some of the challenges or some of the issues of space science in Africa. So my understanding is that the Institute will help us discuss among ourselves, ask some of the questions like, what do we see as the main gaps and challenge for the uptake of science technology by African countries, and what deserve priority attention? What could be some of the key elements, the core elements about the importance of space technology to enhancing policy decision by African countries? What are some of the quick wins we can put in place to stimulate the usage of space science and technology for socioeconomic planning and management? We should also ask ourselves so far why space science and technology is not well introduced into the working environment of many of our African nations. Is that data issues, capacity issues, financial issues, what? I believe that those questions might be openly discussed within the Institute, and we help us to detect some of the core niches where we should put more effort and put more emphasis. So as I conclude, I would like to reiterate again how much the Economic Commission for Africa will continue to be committed to support all initiatives, all programs, all networks, all African countries in their effort to strengthen their space system and infrastructure. We'll continue to use our convening power because this is where we can best contribute to initiatives like this one, to foster the dialogue with member state, African Science and Research institutions, as well as other sectors like the private sectors, the civil society, to increase the awareness in space science and technology and the insight space science and technology can bring to economic growth and social development. We are seeing the Institute to be a kind of catalyst, and if I might say, a think tank that will rightly advise institutions like ECA, like the African Union, like the African Development Bank, where we should give more emphasis and where we should put our hand in terms of developing strategies, business model, and application to support the overall continental space enterprise in the continent. Today, Dr. Abiodun, Dr. Val, Lulu, a team, we are all proud of this big achievement. And I conclude in begging for you to pardon yourself and be proud of what you have done and will continue to do from now on. Congratulations, and with very best wish for every success to come through the African Space Leadership Institute. Thank you for the opportunity of giving this quick remarks. Over to you, A-team.
Thank you, Mr. Nogema, for your address. So the next to give a keynote speech is Professor Kairouwe Shrogu. So I'll just give, I'll read his bio. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here in person because of an emergency assignment that he had to do, which was concurrently going on with this. So, but the good thing is that he was gracious to do a video recording of his keynote speech. So we're going to play that shortly. But I'll just read his bio first. Kaihowe Shrogul is the president of the International Institute of Space Law, the global association of space lawyers from more than 50 countries. He served as chair of the legal subcommittee of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, that's the UN COPUOS, which is the highest body of space law making. He was the chair from 2014 to 2016. Presently, he works as the special advisor for political affairs in the European Space Agency. Most recently, he has been co-editing a book titled A Research Agenda for Space Policy at Edward Elgar Publishing. And of course, you know, space policy is one of our key priority areas in this institute. So, so Val, you can go ahead with the video.
Hello, my name is Kaihowe Shrogul, and I am the president of the International Institute of Space Law. I'm really honored that I have been invited to speak at the opening of the African Space Leadership Institute. This is a wonderful step, and I'm really glad that I can be part of it. Let me say a few words on Africa's voice, which is needed for key issues in international space policy, space law, and regulation. First of all, I would like to recognize that Africa has diplomatic power. And what you see behind me is the meeting room of the UN COPUOS legal subcommittee sessions. And I might say that not only currently Africa has the seat as the chair, but also one of the speakers in this opening of the Institute, Tare Brisibe, has been chair of the legal subcommittee. So there is diplomatic power, and I can only encourage you to use it. Then Africa has talent, and this is what you can see here, the group photo. It shows the winning team of Africa in the world finals of the IISL Manfred Lux Space Law Moot Court, which is judged by 3 judges of the International Court of Justice. And a few years ago in Bremen, the African team won the world finals. And believe me, this is a tough competition. Not only that more than 100 teams are participating in this competition, but it's also very tough to compete in front of the judges from the highest court of justice. And the African team made it. So Africa has talent. And I should say Africa has solutions. It has solutions to so many issues where we in other parts of the world should take and have to take recourse to and look, listen, and learn from Africa. And this is altogether something where I am sure that your institute, the African Space Leadership Institute, will make a big impact. Let the voice of Africa be heard. Let me also point out 2 substantive items. When we look at space policy and law development, we are, on the one hand, approaching anarchy in space. We have congested, contested areas, and we have growing risks and threats of militarization, and that rule-based systems are not applied anymore. On the other hand, and this is a contradictory and rather opposed trend, we have at the same time a rapidly expanding global space economy. Today, around 400 billion, which might reach by 2040, 1 trillion. So a negative trend and a positive trend. We have, on the one hand, the anarchy, which is shown and which is, let's say, manifested in many said events, anti-satellite tests, for example, but also trends where we have to see that confidence building is not in the core, and transparency is neither of the policies of a number of countries. And there we have to find solutions like space traffic management or better cyber security. It is also that we have to find new solutions for the exploration of outer space, be it in near Earth orbit, be it also on the moon and other celestial bodies, and that we maintain the rule of law, in particular, the overarching principles which are enshrined in the Outer Space Treaty as the freedom of use, non-appropriation, and peaceful uses, as well as international cooperation. Space, outer space, is a global common. The second point, briefly to mention, the global space economy. We are all part of the global space economy, and Africa will become a big actor, a very big actor in the global space economy. So we should together look at how to develop rules which are on the one hand efficient, but which are also fair. And this is something we have to do together, and where we have to find a number of areas where we can immediately take actions. We should also remember and remind that the ITU is possibly an excellent model to also include non-governmental actors, which are also now spreading in African states and which have to be listened to and have to be nurtured also through a good regulatory environment. Now this, again, leads me to the point that the African diplomatic power, the African talent, and the solutions which are provided by Africa for a lot of policy areas and economic areas are so important that they have to be manifested and they have to be communicated also in various ways. And I put together this with my wish that the African Space Leadership Institute is a very good forum for doing that, and also a translator and communicator of these issues. And you can be sure that the International Institute of Space Law, IISL, is ready to be a good partner in that effort. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the success for a prosperous institute. Thank you.
Thank you to all our keynote speakers. I won't try to summarize what Mr. Nongema has spoken and what Professor Schrogel said earlier, so that we can have enough time for our panel discussion and for an interactive session. So I'll call on Dr. Val Musami, our co-founder, to take up the floor and moderate the panel discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really ecstatic to be here. I think, like most of you on the call, we all wanted to see Africa succeed in some way or the other. And so I'm really honored to chair this panel session. Just before I kick into it, I just want to give you a slight insight. Etu mentioned the space policy. And so the space policy has a number of objectives. And one of the objectives is strengthening Africa's access to space services. And in that objective, we had a number of what we call policy principles. And essentially the policy principles was around using existing space infrastructure, don't go and duplicate whatever exists, and then to coherently develop, upgrade, and operate the cutting-edge African space infrastructure on that particular base. Now, once you get your infrastructure up and going, you then need to promote capacity building for the development of space services. So infrastructure needs the capacity to drive it. And once you have that, you then develop and increase our space asset base in Africa. So those were essentially the policy principles we were advocating for in the space policy. So in that grain, today's panel discussion is around enabling Africa's development through developing its space infrastructure and capabilities. And I'm actually pleased to have quite an esteemed panel to actually engage with during this panel session. I'm going to, first of all, just start off by asking each of the panel members to come online and give a 5 or so remarks, and then we'll have a few questions and we'll open it up to the floor. So I want to start off with Dr. Tidiane Ouattara. He's been introduced before, but he's essentially the space science expert and coordinator for GMES in Africa program, but he's also leading the initiatives within the African Union Commission around the space portfolio of the file. Tidiane, can I call you on?
Thank you very much, Dr. Val. Once again, thanks to ASLI for giving us the opportunity to talk about the African Space Agenda. Quickly, I will summarize the space agenda into looking at 2 priorities. From the African Union perspective, the continental level, we needed to, and as said in the space policy and strategy, we needed to have a governance. And that governance body will be the African Space Agency. And while we are establishing the governance body, we had to continue demonstrating to the African leaders to what extent space is beneficial for them in their decision-making process, as well as in implementing their different sustainable development programs. At that level, the African Space Agency is leaving to the African Union Commission is leaving to the African Space Agency the opportunity to develop the appropriate programs that Africa will need. Therefore, the African Union Commission intent is not now to develop programs, space programs per se for Africa, but through the African Space Agency. Let me say something here. The African Space Agency is very different from the European Space Agency and from other continental space agencies. The particularity of the African Space Agency is the fact that the African Space Agency is an organ of the African Union Commission. By fact, all the 55 countries are members of the African Space Agency. Secondly, the African Space Agency will develop and implement programs based on the policy priorities as stated by the African Union Head of State and Government. That should be very clear. The instructions, the priorities of the African Space Agency are coming from the African Union through the already established policy bodies and processes and mechanisms. Therefore, it is not an agency belonging to a country. It is not an agency that will do what they want because they think it is the best science to be done. It will be done, as I said, it will be operated under the policies, the rules, the law, and all the mechanisms the African Union has for all other specialized institutions, let's say like that. That is very important. The African Space Agency will be in Cairo for sure. It is the hosting country, chosen after a transparent and lengthy process. But this institution belongs to all Africans, and you will see when it will be operational, for those who are interested in reading the statute, all is done in such a way. This institution is led by all Africa, not by a country, not by an institution, but by all Africa. While we are doing that, as I said, we were implementing some programs or specific studies. Let's say GMS in Africa. GMS in Africa is just an opportunity to demonstrate to our head of state and decision makers to what extent Earth observation can be used for natural resources, water, marine and coastal areas resources management. That is important. And as a continent, as we can work together, how we can work together. For example, GMS in Africa, it is 120 African institutions working together to address, the two services, natural resources, water, as I said, one service, and marine and coastal area. While we are doing and implementing the GMS in Africa, we are also, and that is very important, we've undertaken some studies done by Africans for Africans that will give ammunitions, in addition to other studies coming from other sources, that will give ammunitions to the African Space Agency's new leaders to develop appropriate programs for Africa. When they will be there, they won't start from the scratch. They will start with some studies. Currently, what we are saying, we have done very well, thanks to all the African space stakeholders. The agency is there, the studies have been done, the GMS program is being implemented very well. Therefore, the space agenda for Africa in the upcoming next years there will be a necessity to update the space policy and strategy for sure, to be aligned with the new context, the new priorities. Secondly, there will be a necessity to develop concrete programs in the 4 segments of the space as stated in the space policy: Earth observation, satellite communication, navigation and positioning, and astronomy and space science per se. But in doing that, we have to look at the 3 segments of the space, the 3 components: the ground segment, the space segment, and what we call the services, and some people, other people call it downstreams. These 3 components should be looked at together. And in doing that also, the capacity building will be considered in terms of infrastructure and in terms of human capital. All that to conclude that Africa should be where Africans will decide to see African continental space program to be. Sometimes people ask me, will you develop satellites? I said, I don't know. Will you do that? I said, I don't know. Because it is not about what we think, it is about what Africa will make as decision through, once again, already established channels through the African Union mechanism. I will stop here. 5 minutes is not enough to cover all, but it is clear that space traffic, space debris, space, there are several points we can talk about later in details, but Africa should be where Africans will think Africa needs to be in terms of space. Thank you very much, Dr. Val, and please, I'm available for questions and comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Tidiane. I'm just going to move on to the next speaker very quickly in the interest of time. I'm going to introduce Dr. Peter Martinez. He's currently the Executive Director of the Secure World Foundation, and he's also had extensive experience in multilateral space diplomacy, space policy formulation, and space regulation. He has also extensive experience in capacity building in space science and technology and in workforce development. I'm not going to go through his entire bio, just to give you a sense as to where he is at the moment. Peter, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Val. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's great to be among so many dear African colleagues that I've had the pleasure of working with for decades now. And great to be here at this launch event of the African Space Leadership Institute, marking the 65th anniversary of the start of the space age and the 55th anniversary of the signing of the Outer Space Treaty, as many of the previous speakers mentioned the importance of regulation. So I would just like to congratulate Ade, Val, Etim, and Lulu, and all others involved in the initiative to establish the African Space Leadership Institute. And I think that the attendance today and the remarks indicate the interest in this very timely initiative. So at this point, what I'd like to do is to address the aspects of a sustainable space ecosystem. And what I'd like to do is to share my screen and show one slide to give context to my remarks. So I hope that you are all seeing a PowerPoint slide showing the elements of a sustainable space ecosystem. And Val, if you could just indicate, please, if that's showing.
Yes, we can. We can.
Great. So this slide shows some of the elements of a sustainable space ecosystem, and I'm just going to briefly work my way from left to right on this, because I think it touches some of the elements that I think ASLI can contribute to very significantly in all of these aspects. It goes without saying that political support at a national and regional level is key, because this support is what gives the impulse for a national space policy and the development of a supportive regulatory system. This policy and regulatory framework must be developed by governments in close cooperation with the private sector and academia. And the policy will have an industrial development component that addresses the identified balance between autonomy and dependence on space technologies and space-derived information and services. It also sets the tone for what the private sector can expect from government in the form of supporting contracts and legislation. This support comes in the form of opportunities for industrial participation in space activities defined by government, which creates industrial capabilities that can then be commercially exploited with other partners. The marriage of capabilities with opportunities is what attracts both financial capital and human capital. Developing and retaining human capital in the space sector is a huge challenge, not only for Africa, but everywhere. And this translates into a need for a steady stream of opportunities if we are to avoid the perennial problem of brain drain that Africa has faced for decades. Fortunately, a growing number of opportunities are being generated by the private sector, fueled by growing interest in the space sector from venture capital funds and even institutional investors. Moving on into the academic sector and state-funded research and development organizations also play a role in supporting human capital development, as well as industrial development through academic R&D and government-funded research labs. Thus, investment in academic R&D infrastructure is a way of indirectly supporting industry, especially if industry can access facilities that would be too expensive or too infrequently used for a private company to justify establishing such facilities. A final element is that of strategic partnerships, both at the state level and also among commercial actors. Here, there is a rich history of states working hand in glove with their commercial actors. And I think this is one of the lessons that African countries can take from other space nations. So in closing, I would just like to list what I think are the top 3 things that should be done by African governments or the African space sector to capitalize on space for sustainable development and economic growth, and the role of ASLI in those. The first in my mind is to support capacity building in government, in industry, and in academia. And ASLI, with its rich expertise among its membership, as we heard earlier on, is very well placed to support capacity building in various dimensions. The second would be to adopt an all-of-government approach to space that integrates domestic space capabilities into national development plans. And here, I don't just mean ritual policy statements on societal benefits of space, but a real commitment to harnessing those benefits that translates to budgetary action by government and programmatic action by the private sector. This connection of space with the UN Sustainable Development Goals is clear. The challenge to governments and industry is how to translate policy into action. And here again, ASLI will be very well positioned to support governments in this regard. The third area is developing an enabling regulatory framework for space activities that create certainty for commercial actors and investors. And this is not the same as having just lowering barriers for authorization, but really developing regulation that encourages responsible investment in space activities so that Africa can be the responsible space actor that it aspires to be in the African space policy. And here again, ASLI is very well placed with its expertise to support these initiatives. So with that, I will end my remarks and hand back to our chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for those remarks. I'm then going to jump very quickly to Rose Njogu-Mwangi, just to give you a brief summary in terms of where she's at the moment. Rose is actually a knowledgeable aerospace engineer, and she has about 10 years of professional experience. And she has a very strong background in aerospace and aircraft design, and specifically unmanned systems. So she's currently the project lead and systems engineer at SayariLabs, where she works with a team in matters of space innovation and satellite development. Rose, can I hand over to you?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you people. I am so honored to be here. I feel like I don't even measure up to the amount of brilliance that is represented here today, but I am truly honored to be here. And as we begin, I can, let me just get myself in order here. So just a brief introduction, maybe space is the next frontier, and as Dr. Ouattara likes to say, it is truly the El Dorado of space business. And this may not be because of the years of research for Africa or infrastructure that we have, some of developing countries have, but because of the new space era that has democratized space and significantly lowered the entry barriers that most of us, and especially the developing countries, have had to hold back. So we are truly grateful that we are able to get into this new era of space and be able to access it, because it felt like it was very out there. And so being in industry, and as mentioned by Dr. Val, that I moved from unmanned systems to space, it was a great breath of fresh air for us within Africa to be able to access it. For me, I'll go through a few things that in the role that the space industry can play in Africa's development. Currently, we have about 272 companies in the African space industry, and this number keeps growing because of how accessible space has become. We also have, as mentioned by one of us, that the space economy in 2021 was recorded to be about $19 billion US dollars, and also it's projected to grow in the next couple of years. So why does this matter to us in Africa? I think we have, some of the keynote speakers have alluded to some of the different challenges that Africa experiences. And collectively, we have recognized that truly space is the solution for some of these problems that have plagued our continent for very many years. And just to highlight some of them, I know most of us have suffered in the flooding and because of the climate change, where you go in one country, for example, Kenya, sometimes you have flooding in one corner of the country, and then you have a drought in a different area. And so these are some of the things that are affecting holding back our regret and regressing our as Africa. We also have an issue with connectivity within Africa. As much as, yes, we've made some progress, we have some of the areas are lacking basic connectivity. We also have problems in borders insecurities, where they threaten lives and also livelihoods. And also, just to mention, in natural resources, we also have different problems. For example, in Kenya, we have a problem with the encroachment into the forests, which also in turn boils into climate change, and also finally to the floods and the drought that I was speaking of. But we know that space has solutions for this, and how the space industry can plug in. Maybe I can highlight 3 different areas mainly. First, I'll start with space data. I believe that if the space industry is able to provide the relevant space data to our decision makers and to the researchers in our institutions, then, for example, the Earth observation and also geoinformation data is very important in informing governments and industry. And also, in terms of the different areas that I've mentioned that we are having challenges, we have a crop production that has become an issue in Africa. And we know that Africa, although it harbors 60% of world arable land, we still only generate 10%, which is way below what we're supposed to be generating. And so with use of data, we're able to better utilize the land and also better allocate it to different crops based on our findings with space data. Space data can also help in the management of natural resources, for example, forests and water bodies. We also can mitigate floods and drought. This can help save lives and livelihoods. For example, there's a study that was done on the Rift Valley lakes here in Kenya, and they have been rising. And so using the satellite data, the researchers have been able to analyze the progress and the effects and advise government on how to protect some of these communities. Another way is by providing useful data to our security forces in areas that have persistent insecurities, that we are able to safeguard lives before we send in our troops and monitor our borders as well. Another way we can plug in as industry is through infrastructure. In building infrastructure, we can look at two ways, maybe in the development of ground station investment and also the development of launch capabilities. For example, if I set up a ground station here in Kenya, using this one ground station, I'm able to take care of all satellites that are going to go over Kenya and also take care of all the satellites that might be developed by Kenyans within Kenya. And so I'm able to make accessible services that might be otherwise expensive and inaccessible. But just beyond development in infrastructure for each nation, I believe that as Africa, we have an opportunity to come together and build like a space African infrastructure where we agree that this structure, for example, if I do a launch pad here in Kenya, then I don't expect that Uganda will also do a launch pad, because it's necessary, but it's a sort of a waste of resources, because we can partner with our little resources and partner together and be able to share resources and be able to maybe save some money along the way, while also sharing your knowledge in the process. Infrastructure is also very important. It allows us to own our own solutions. I think 2020 has taught all of us a very important lesson with COVID, that you might have money to purchase a solution that you need, but it's not accessible to you because maybe the country that's offering it is using it for their own benefit or for their own citizens. And so it's very important for we as Africa to have solutions for our own problems within Africa and within our reach. The last point I can mention about how space industry can come into building the African development is by being part of the policy development and also capacity building. Space has been one of the unique sectors in some of the African nations where the industry is actually informing the government agencies, where you find there's no agency, and so the industry players are the ones that are helping the government come up with policy, come up with a structure and an architecture to be able to handle matters space. And so we can, like Hendrina rightly stated, majority of employment is in space government. And so even the industry needs to pull up and be able to offer employment for the youth as it grows, and also partner with academia to tailor the curriculum for what is actually required in industry. An example of what SayariLabs is currently has currently been able to do. We've partnered with the Kenya Space Agency to train actually university students so that they're not only learning about engineering and space systems, but they're also able to tailor this engineering to what is currently being used in industry. And so using this training, they're able to develop their own nanosatellite. And so that is a case where we have partnered with academia, we've partnered with industry, who is SayariLabs, and also we've partnered with Kenya Space Agency, who is the government representative and regulator for Kenya. Just to conclude, I think for Africa to benefit in the space solutions that we have, we must have a well-informed public sector, which can define the strategy and policy. And I think this is where ASL can also come in to be able to train on where Africa wants to go and how we want to tailor that so that we do it collectively without a disconnect between the different states. We also have to have a highly developed academic institution that is able to build the capacity and build what you have mentioned as critical mass to be able to push this industry. You cannot do it alone, and as we age, we have to be able to raise those behind us. And also, as a third thing, is a thriving private sector to be able to serve as an engine for economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for that. In the interest of time, I'm just going to jump to Minoo. Dr. Minoo Rathnasabapathy is a research engineer at the MIT Media Labs. And in this role, she helps coordinate projects in collaboration with international developmental organizations, national governments, and entrepreneurial companies to apply space technology in support of the United Nations SDGs. She also leads efforts in designing and developing the Space Sustainability Rating in collaboration with the World Economic Forum and the European Space Agency. So Minoo's work has also been featured on CNN Business, BBC World News, and ABC News. Welcome, Minoo, and over to you.
Thank you, Val. I first want to acknowledge Ade, Val, Etienne, Lulu, and the entire team for their efforts to set up the Institute and really for bringing us all together. We are here because we see the value add of the initiative to present a cohesive voice for Africa and, of course, to build on existing infrastructure and existing efforts as well. I want to start my presentation by picking up on the theme that Kayuve actually presented earlier, and that is reinstating Africa's diplomatic power in the international space fora. And as Peter mentioned as well, it's the 55th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty, which came into effect on the 10th of October, 1967. So if you actually look at the history of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is one of the biggest UN committees talking about the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the space sustainability, Egypt was representing Africa as one of 18 members of COPUS back in 1958. In 1961, we had Chad, Sierra Leone, and Morocco join, and before the 80s, Kenya, Nigeria, Sudan, Benin, Cameroon, and Niger had also joined. So Africa has been part of space law and policy discussions from the very early stages of these international fora. And now, 50 years later, if you look at the statistics of COPUS in 2021, as I said, it's one of the biggest UN committees consisting of 100 states, with Angola, Rwanda, Mauritius, and Ethiopia as its newest members. So on that line of thought, as Kayuve mentioned, we have a great potential for diplomatic power on these international fora. And I'm really excited for ASLI to take on this leadership role and position us in this space. So over the past decade, as I mentioned, COPUS has become one of the biggest committees. It has risen by 50%. And there's a common theme, which is overarching sustainability with regards to space policy, law, and strategy, again, focusing on the SDGs and space sustainability. And what we're seeing, at least through the research, is that emerging space actors are recognizing the importance of these topics really as a priority, which we've seen reflected in the increased involvement in such fora, both on an international scale, as well as a regional scale. And this is where I'm really excited for ASLI to take that initiative. And so on an international scale, we recently saw in 2021, Nigeria joined a number of member states to propose new terms of reference with regards to the work and the work plan in establishing the new working group on the long-term sustainability guidelines, commonly called the LTS Working Group 2.0. That was at the 58th session of the Scientific and Technical Committee of COPUS. But what we're seeing right now is potentially a lack on that regional initiatives. So when we look at other regions, and one example is the Asia Pacific region that recently instated the National Space Law Initiative, consisting of a number of emerging space nations in the Asia Pacific region. But their goal there was to bring, again, a cohesive, continued voice to enhance the activities of space policy in that region. And I think with the recent initiatives that we're seeing regionally on the African continent, ASLI really has a role here to play. I want to also refer you to the UN stakeholder report that was recently published. Very quickly, 3 points where I think that ASLI could really play a role that was pulled out of the outcomes of the stakeholder report. One is enhancing existing transparency and confidence building measures in order to develop greater confidence and political trust, especially between African spacefaring nations. Secondly, and you see it right here, is the need for multi-stakeholder dialogues involving government, academia, the non-governmental sector, as well as the private sector. And the third avenue I see for ASLI, and I would be remiss to not mention this, especially given that there are in fact representatives of the Space Generation Advisory Council and the International Space University here on this call, is that the voice of the next generation needs to be enhanced. And so what we're seeing through the research and through the stakeholder report is that there is a direct need for educational and cultural programs that really build a framework for policy making. And as Rose really clearly articulated, that need for the interaction and the nexus between technology and policy and law. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Val. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minoo, for those remarks. I really appreciate it. And then I'm going to move to the last speaker, Dr. Tare Brisibe. He's currently the Senior Legal and Regulatory Counsel with SES, which is a global satellite operator, which is actually headquartered in Luxembourg. And he's actually based in Singapore, where he's responsible for SES's government policy and regulatory activities in the Asia Pacific region. So Tara has some 2 decades of experience in aerospace activities with from private legal practice, having also served in industry, government, and intergovernmental organizations. Tara, can I hand over to you? And welcome.
Sure. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone, or good day, depending on the part of the world that you're dialing in from. And let me thank you, Val, for your kind words of introduction. On this occasion, to mark the launch of the African Space Leadership Institute, let me perhaps say a few words on, in particular, the role of policy and law in ensuring the utilization of space and the benefits of applications from such activities in space for Africa's development. I think that what's probably fundamental to addressing policy and law, I mean, all of the preceding speakers even during the keynotes, made reference to either policy or law or regulation synonymously. One common theme from a legal standpoint is that law is critical to economic life. In fact, I dare say, law is the fabric of society. So if we take that, one level up from a perspective of Africa's development, and we say focus on economic life, then, besides the fundamental role that law plays, the policies that, adopt laws or aim to implement laws or the regulations to implement them and so on, or include the ability to influence a certain level of certainty between humans in society. And so there's no doubt in my mind that modern economies anticipate that the expectations of individuals or corporate entities or legal persons, I think is probably a more encompassing appropriate term, are the determinants of economic actions, which are crucial in deciding the equilibrium, prospects, growth, and development of any economy, and the stability that follows. And so if we juxtapose that construct against the utilization of space in Africa's development, whether it's the satellite manufacturer, whether it's the entity that finances satellites, the launch vehicle provider, the entities that actually consume the services that are provided from various applications deriving from the use of outer space, we see that there are several legal concepts that impact on economic development. I've touched briefly on one of them, which is the need to influence that level of certainty. You could refer to that certainty between humans in any society as predictability. Predictability, because what law does is it definitively creates a certain predictable environment in which, for instance, interested parties can invest. It enables procedural clarity, so you know exactly what steps to take in whatever circumstance it is in which you are conducting certain types of activities. There is, of course, the overarching statutory process of codifying laws or legislation that are adopted by any particular jurisdiction or country, irrespective of what those specific intentions of the country in question are. Suffice it to mention that every administration and jurisdiction has its own codification processes. But there's also, importantly, and not necessarily least, is the ability to define and clarify the status of legal persons. Intergovernmental organizations, for the sake of illustration, have a certain legal personality, which may not necessarily be the case with respect to individuals like yourself and myself, or say corporate entities. In fact, when you consider the status of, say, robots and the rise in the reliance on automation and machines, and the possibility that you could actually attribute the status of an individual to such automated devices, it begs the question, how far removed we are from the traditional understanding of legal personality. And against this backdrop, I think the importance of cooperation in the context of outer space activities should be underscored. Whether this is through multilateral agreements, we've had reference to this event coinciding with the signing of the Outer Space Treaty, or the establishment of international regulatory frameworks, in whichever form it is that they've manifested, which, for example, can be used to support competition, such as enabling opportunities for commercial activity, whilst on the other hand, mitigating competition that is malignant, not necessarily benign, such as with respect to the use of force. And so regarding the law and regulation of activities in outer space, which could be undertaken by non-governmental entities, I think it's now firmly established that the body of law that is most closely related to that sort of activities internationally. And it also leads to the corollary that these non-governmental entities, being non-state actors, they typically lack the nature of subjects of international law, because international instruments, such as the treaties, cannot directly regulate their activities. And as a consequence, these entities remain subject to authorization, supervision, and the oversight of states, governments, and their respective legislative mechanisms. What all this means is that in supervising the activities of non-governmental entities, governments, states, are typically required to ensure that these entities under their jurisdiction or control who conduct these activities in outer space have the appropriate structures and procedures for planning and conducting their activities, amongst other reasons, to ensure that they comply with relevant national and international regulatory frameworks, requirements, or policies and processes. And so with these preliminary points, I think it's clear that the appropriate legal and diplomatic mechanisms that will promote cooperation to drive access to space and the benefits of the applications that derive from the utilization of space will probably remain inaccessible to developing countries such as those of the African continent in the absence of specialists with a thorough understanding of such mechanisms, what they constitute, what they are, how they work, how they're formed, and of course the building of institutional capacity.
I'm going to go get him
at the national level. And so let me conclude by taking this opportunity to congratulate the founders of this Space Leadership Institute for clearly what's a very forward-looking strategic initiative, one that will certainly play a pivotal role in building that capacity that the African continent sorely needs, but which is obviously critical to a clear understanding of the legal and diplomatic mechanisms that are the precondition for participating in the conduct of activities in outer space, which in turn impact and ensure the continuing development of Africa. Thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tare, for your comments. I must admit, when all the statements were being made, I picked up quite a number of very good points that I wish we had time to engage on. But I've made copious notes because I will come back to some of the panelists after this particular launch event. I'm also very mindful of the time. And also, if you live in South Africa, you know the load shedding issue. So I'm going to be cut off in the next 2 minutes. I just need to hand over to Etam. Let me just do that, make him the host. Yeah, so I'm going to, unfortunately, we don't have time for any further questions. I've had a few questions that I wanted to pose to the panel members, but in the interest of time, I'm going to hand over to Ade to give you the closing remarks. But I just want to say a very big thank you to all of you for attending this launch event, and we look forward to engaging you in the future. Thank you for coming through. Ade, can I hand over to you?
Okay, I'm having problem. You said your video is not working, so I hope it will work before I finish. Anyway, I am overwhelmingly grateful on behalf of the founders of ASLI, or ASLI, I'm very grateful that all of you are here with us. As I look at the screen, I think right now we have 40 people who are here with us. And you are not just people. You are representatives of great ideas from Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria. I see Etim's wife is with us. Fukunlayo, good day to you. And Professor Mbeki, and thank you for coming. Tare Brisibe, speaking from Singapore. And Dr. Linden Petzer. All of you are here with excellent vision of what ASLI should do and should not do. But the question that has not been asked, the elephant in the room, is that you have addressed what ASLI should do, but why should ASLI do that? Some of you mentioned that, but with permission from a Nigerian minister, as far back as the year 2001 or 2002, he said the following: Nigeria is well endowed with abundant human and material resources, yearning to be harnessed through science and technology. Nigeria is indeed an excellent case study in the evolution of social systems. She is classified as developing, as indeed she is, but analysts believe that with the requisite policy formulation and implementation, she could become a developed country by the opening decades of the 21st century. That was the year 2000, okay? But unfortunately, is that the case for Nigeria or for Africa as a whole? The biggest problem, on the basis of my own interaction with many of you here and many others who are not here, is we have a lot of capabilities, but putting them together. And the word that resonated the most during this deliberation is the word commitment at the political and decision-making levels of our respective African countries. We've gone to sign agreements all over the place. We work internationally very well. But when it comes to working locally, our commitment is wanting. And that is where ASLI comes in. And I thank Etim for how he brought all the issues up at the beginning, where he identified the policy goals of ASLI, and he identified some of those goals, particularly in slide number 5. He spoke about the vision and mission of ASLI and the objectives. So how we are going to put all of this together in the coming years is our challenge, and it's an opportunity for all of us to work with you and for you to work with us to do a better job so that we can do better for Africa. Because what is missing is not that the policy is not there, but our understanding of the meaning of policy. Because simply stated, science and technology, as much as they are pillars of our well-being, our economic and social development, and our future as Africans. But in the absence of a science and technology development policy, there is nothing to aim at, to budget for, or to commit to in each of the African countries. So if we don't do a good job of that, we are going nowhere. When I look at ASLI today, I look also at African Space Leadership Conference. Etim started by speaking about 2012. Yeah, 2012 was the 10th anniversary of UMESAT and African users of MetSat. I was at that conference in Addis Ababa. And that was when I walked into Muhammad's office and I said, why are you getting a foreigner to develop African space policy? You don't have African talents? And from that day, we started working. We ended up today with an African space policy under the leadership of Val, an African space strategy. And Tidiane and his crew back in Addis Ababa are moving on to have the African Space Agency. I'm very happy to hear from him that the agency is an all-African agency. It's for all of us. So we need to contribute to his operation. And those countries that in Africa are already in space area, my advice is that, yes, some of you already, you have the assets, and some are yearning to have the assets. But particularly to those who do not have any assets in space, I want to conclude by saying that you can go into space without having any physical access in space itself. You don't have, you can be space capable without having a satellite of your own, because many satellites are available, some with free data. But let us work together to make sure that we understand what the satellites can do for us. And when we say we want to be space capable, let us commit ourselves to make the resources available, both in terms of human capability and financial capability, and also to encourage our private sector to be part and parcel of this effort. Finally, the African universities need to be more involved in what we do. Because when you look at the history of space today, be it in Japan, United States, Russia, and so on and so forth, space started at the university level. And that is why I really have a lot of respect for Stellenbosch University in South Africa for doing all they have done to date. And hopefully that will be a good example for us to follow. And we invite our brothers and sisters in our political entities, ECA, AU, African Development Bank, to come on board with ASLI and let us move ahead. And in moving ahead, this is our first effort. We are coming up with other new initiatives as to how we are going to address the technology part of space, and how we are going to revive what we have set up before, and particularly the African Space Foundation, to look at this issue. I want to thank my colleagues, Val, Etim, and Lulu, who have been very hardworking in getting this idea together. It has been challenging, but with so many of you showing up here today, I think it has also become a very rewarding experience. So I thank you all on behalf of ASLI.
Thank you, Dr. Abiodun, for the closing remarks. And once again, following up on what Dr. Abiodun said, I want to thank everybody for making up and joining us for this event. We do really appreciate you taking time out from your schedule. Unfortunately, we couldn't have much discussion on the panel, but we look, like I said earlier, we plan to have several platforms of fora for interaction and exchange of ideas. And the interaction is not only within Africa, it's also Africa and the diaspora, Africa and the international community. You may want to mark on your calendar, that I've mentioned it earlier, our first major event, it's coming up on November 3, and that's the UN Africa Space Partnership Roundtable. And that program was organized, we have the support of the African Union Commission and the White House, the Office for Science and Technology Policy in the White House. The program is organized in view of the US Africa Leaders Summit coming up in December. Some other announcements will be made later. The programs, the courses we want to organize, the webinars coming up. Like there's a webinar coming up in January, something that has to do with space sustainability. But all this will be communicating on our website and on other platforms. Thanks once again. Thanks to our keynote speakers. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to all guests. And we look forward to other opportunities of engaging with you either online or in person. Thanks everybody, and I wish everybody a nice day or evening, depending on which part of the world you are. Thank you, and bye for now.